This book, Alejandro's Gift, is another book in our series of texts about caring for our world. Alejandro's Gift is by Richard E. Albert, and it was illustrated by Sylvia Long. This is read with permission from Chronicle Books, LLC. And this book is about a man who tries to make a difference in his own small world. How do you feel when you do something nice for someone? Do you feel good about it? Do you often try your best each day to do something nice for someone else or for the world around you? This might be the perfect time as we're sequestered in our homes and are looking for things to do each day. So we're going to continue reading to figure out what Alejandro's gift might be. You might even be able to predict that by looking at the page and the setting, and perhaps you already can surmise what Alejandro's gift will be to his environment. I also wanted to mention that Alejandro's Gift is a realistic fiction book. I hope you enjoy it. Alejandro's small adobe house stood beside a lonely desert road. Beside the house stood a well and a windmill to pump water from the well. Water for Alejandro, and for his only companion, a burro. It was a lonely place, and Alejandro welcomed any who stopped by to refresh themselves at the well. But visitors were few, and after they left, Alejandro felt lonelier than before. To more easily endure the lonely hours, Alejandro planted a garden filled with carrots, beans, and large brown onions, tomatoes and corn, melons, squash, and small red peppers. Most mornings found Alejandro tending the garden, watching it grow. These were times he cherished, and he often stayed for hours, working until driven indoors by the desert heat. The days went by one after another with little change, until one morning when there was an unexpected visitor. This visitor came not from the desert road, but from the desert itself. What do you think life must feel like in the desert? Think about what Alejandro's life must feel like as you look at him stooped over those plants and over the earth. Here we get a close-up view of Alejandro's face, and although the book said he felt lonely, when I look at this illustration, I realize that he looks pretty content. He looks fairly happy. Why do you think Alejandro might have a feeling of happiness? Take a look at the illustration surrounding him. Why do you think Alejandro might actually be content? You may spend a moment to write about that in your notebook. A ground squirrel crept from the underbrush. Moving warily over the sand, it hesitated and looked around. Alejandro paused, keeping very quiet as the squirrel approached the garden. It ran up to one of the furrows, drank its fill of water, and scampered away. After it left, Alejandro realized that for those few moments his loneliness had been all but forgotten. And because he felt less lonely, Alejandro found himself hoping the squirrel would come again. The squirrel did come again from time to time, bringing along small friends. Wood rats and pocket gophers, jackrabbits, kangaroo rats, pocket mice. Birds, too, became aware of Alejandro's garden. Roadrunners, Gila woodpeckers, thrashers, cactus wrens, sage sparrows, mourning doves, and others came in the evening to perch on the branches of a mesquite bush or to rest on the arms of a lone saguaro before dropping down for a quick drink before nightfall. Occasionally, even an old desert tortoise could be seen plodding toward the garden. Suddenly, Alejandro found the time was passing more quickly. He was rarely lonely. He had only to look up from his hoe or from wherever he might be at any moment to find a small friend nearby. For a while, this was all that mattered to Alejandro, but after a time he wasn't so sure. He began asking himself if there was something more important than just making himself feel less lonely. It took Alejandro little time to see there was. What do you think that more important thing could be? If you were Alejandro and you noticed all of these animals were coming to you, do you think you would find something else that was more important than preventing yourself from being lonely? Take a minute to think about that and write it down. What could that something more important be? Okay. He began to realize that his tiny desert friends came to his garden not for company, but for water. And he found himself thinking of the other animals in the desert. And there Alejandro is, looking at one of his animals and thinking about something other than himself. Animals like the coyote and the desert gray fox, the bobcats, the skunks, the badgers, the long-nosed coatis, the peccaries, sometimes called javelinas, the short-tempered wild pigs of the desert, the antlered mule deer, the does, and the fawns. Finding enough water was not a problem. With his windmill and well, Alejandro could supply ample water for any and all. Getting it to those who needed it was something else. The something else, Alejandro decided, was a desert waterhole. And here are many of those animals just mentioned in the previous page that Alejandro realized desperately needed water in the dry desert. Without delay, Alejandro started digging. It was tiring work, taking many days in the hot desert sun. But the thought of giving water to so many thirsty desert dwellers more than made up for the drudgery. What do you think drudgery means there? And when it was filled, Alejandro was pleased with the gift he had made for his desert friends. There was good reason to suppose it would take time for the larger animals to discover their new source of water. So Alejandro was patient. He went about as usual, feeding his burro, tending the garden, and doing countless other chores. Days passed and nothing happened. Still, Alejandro was confident. But the days turned to weeks, and it was still quiet at the waterhole. Why, Alejandro wondered, weren't they coming? What could he have done wrong? We learn a lot about Alejandro on this page. Stop for a minute and think about what we know about who he is as a human being, just from the few things we learned about him at this scene. And here we see Alejandro pondering what could have possibly gone wrong. How do you think he feels right now? You can stop if you'd like and write what you think down in your notebook. How might he be feeling at this moment? The absence of the desert folk might have remained a mystery had Alejandro not come out of the house one morning when a skunk was in the clearing beyond the waterhole. Seeing Alejandro, the skunk darted to safety in the underbrush. It suddenly became very clear why Alejandro's gift was being shunned. Alejandro couldn't believe he had been so thoughtless, but what was important now was to put things right as quickly as possible. So here's another opportunity for you to predict what you think is going on. What did Alejandro suspect was the reason for the animal's absence? Think about it, and we'll see if you're right. Waterhole number 2 was built far from the house and screened by heavy desert growth. When it was filled and ready, Alejandro waited with mixed emotions. He was hopeful, yet he couldn't forget what had happened the first time. As it turned out, He was not disappointed. So, did he fix the problem? And if so, how did he fix that problem? What did he do to be more hopeful that this time would be successful? And here's another image of the area in which Alejandro was building his second water hole. Aha, it looks like Alejandro figured it out. So, wait and see what happens. The animals of the desert did come, each as it made its own discovery. Because the water hole was now sheltered from the small adobe house and the desert road, the animals were no longer fearful. And although Alejandro could not see through the desert growth surrounding the water hole, he had ways of knowing it was no longer being shunned. By the twitter of birds gathering in the dusk, by the rustling of mesquite in the quiet desert evening telling of the approach of a coyote, a badger, or maybe a desert fox, by the soft hoofbeats of a mule deer, or the unmistakable sound of a herd of peccaries charging toward the water hole. And here you can see Alejandro. He has a really interesting expression on his face. The illustrator did a wonderful job of conveying his emotion at this moment. How do you think he felt at this time? And in these moments, when Alejandro sat quietly listening to the sounds of his desert neighbors, he knew that the gift was not so much a gift that he had given, but a gift he had received. Do you agree with that? Is this more of a gift that he received for himself or a gift he had given? What do you think? And that concludes the story of Alejandro's gift. So take a minute to think about and write down what you think the message of this story was. What do you think the author was trying to teach you, the reader, and me as well, about Alejandro, about life in the desert, about how to approach life? What lessons can we learn from the story Alejandro's Gift? And one more question I want to ask you is, why do you think the author wrote this story? What was Richard Albert's purpose when he wrote this story? What did he have in mind? This is a really fascinating addition to this story. At the very end, there's a glossary describing lots of different types of animals that were referred to in the story. And at the very top of the page on the left-hand side, it says the southwestern region of the United States is made up of Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. A variety of wildlife can be found in its varied habitats. The following glossary lists some of the animals and plants shown in this book. So although this was a book of realistic fiction, there were many actual elements within the story that exist in real life. All of the animals mentioned are animals that do exist in the southwestern region of the United States. So there's a nonfiction component at the end of this story that really helps you learn about the creatures and appreciate that natural setting in the Southwest. So not only did you learn about Alejandro and his life experience, although it was fictional, you can also learn a lot about life in the Southwest. So take a minute to think about what you learned about what it might feel like to live in the deserts of the Southwest. And you can even spend some time reading about these beautiful creatures that we're not used to seeing where we live in the Great Plains and the Midwest. I hope you enjoyed the story of Alejandro's gift.